Hello, this is the Coloma Lotus wildfire simulation video. We're doing an orientation here with the low areas in purple and the high areas in red. This is the general topography that influences the models. We bring them the Fire Safe Council boundaries and some other information regarding federal lands owned by BLM here. And then we'll shift into looking at some of the fire history, which is significant, although none seems to have impacted Lotus or Coloma within record. To the west there we have the 2017 Axle, which had some potential, and we'll take a look at that later. The project slate we have, which is some fuel breaks to the west, as well as some roadside clearances, as you can see in the different colors, are intended to, of course, create some breaks. We'll zoom in a little closer and take a look at that with these simulations. So it is important to remember that we are reducing fuels and we're looking for changes in fire spread, but without suppression activity. For our first simulation, we'll take a look off the ranch there. We've got to start near the river with some very basic light winds coming out of the west at 15 miles an hour. Fire spread, you can see, is pretty reflected between the two runs until we get across the river here, and then we see some impact against that fuel break, which does a good job at slowing it down, although not stopping it completely. Where the fire moves through some of these smaller fuel reduction efforts, that shouldn't be discouraged. Of course, evacuation routes need to be cleared for the safety of people, both coming and going, but they aren't necessarily always intended to stop or slow a fire. Wider fuel breaks, like we saw, are a little more effective at that, as they reduce the fuels over large areas that reduce spotting and other fire activity that might lead to spread. Moving to the next scenario here, we'll take a look at another wide view of the area at 500-meter view, where we do see some spread coming out of off the highway here, which was a fire not too long ago, although it didn't show up in the most recent historic fires data. The reduction along the highway shows some reduced spread. Again, it's not intended to stop, but the slowing is a significant benefit to doing some of this clearing. And once it gets up on the hillside, obviously the slope and the alignment with the winds makes for very rapid runs up that slope, which I think we've seen on smaller scales throughout the canyon. But that definitely mirrors our fire history for the area. Moving through town, though, on the right we see there's just a significant reduction in spread just from having that reduced fuels along the ignition area along the highway. But we do get some spread, and the footprints of the fire start to match up towards the end of the run here. Moving to the next scenario. Zooming in closer to town here, we see ignition out of Marshall Gold Discovery Park, and moving uphill as it hits the fuel break. There's some reduction in spread, and also the reduction in spread going to the east as it crosses the highway there. We don't see that in the retreatment method, just because, again, where we don't have that loading along the side leads to some benefits, but it does move across, spreading and catching up a bit, but definitely reduced footprint as of now. So where we see these fires, we see a reduced fire spread. Doesn't mean that we don't need to support this reduced fuel profile with suppressive action, but it does show that there are some time advantages both for evacuation and suppression that lead to less acres burned and more time for response. For the final segment, we're going to look at defensible space in conjunction with treatments. The topography, again, for the area. And looking at the ignition here, we're going to see some slowdown with the defensible space around the structures in conjunction with the treatments. So on the left we have treatments only, and on the right we have treatments and defensible space around all known structures. Already we see a slowdown on the right-hand side as far as the ability of the fire to move through the populated area. Impacts are definitely seen, but there is much less movement and the rates of spread are reduced. Of course, as it moves up the slope there, we see some of that historic fire pattern, but in the town we can see that there isn't much movement, especially where we have defensible space around the higher population areas. wrapping this up, we'll look a little closer into town here, and we'll do a closer in view of the Marshall Gold Discovery Park. So right here we have another ignition off of Highway 49. Moving into the impacts of the treatment, obviously we have a good slowdown on both sides, although there is some movement, of course, through the park. We don't have too much going out and over. The important thing here is to look at where we have some encroachment into the populated areas on the right-hand side, on the east of 49, where we have defensible space that is a fraction of what it is, as it's already burned through most of those areas with treatment only. Again, so we see some reduced movement on the right-hand side where we have defensible space as it moves through those populated areas, but we do see some of the runs catching up as we hit slope and move up into the wind slope fire alignment. And for our final run here, we'll look at an ignition off the backside of the baseball park there off of Lotus Road. And we see some similar effects with the fuel break along the ridge there. Of course, it does not hold without suppression, but some effects on both sides of that ridge there. Of course, fire can come from either side, and the fuel break is still effective, both helping keep it out of populations on either side. So we see very subtle slowdowns on the right-hand side where we have defensible space around a lot of the structures, but it is important to notice that these slowdowns are subtle victories, and they are the advantage that we try and create for our suppression resources. Where the fuel profile is more defensible, obviously we'll have some better success with putting a fire out. Okay, thanks so much for your attention. We'll see what we can do next time. Thanks.